If you're driving along and you hear this weird clicking sound coming from the wheel well and you're experiencing some instability as you're driving, then you'll want to check the control arms. And if any of them look like this, it's time to replace it. What's up everybody, my name is Fritz and welcome to the channel. That control arm that you just saw is called the thrust arm and it's responsible for the wheel's caster. Visually speaking, it just controls how forward or backward the wheel looks in the wheel well. More importantly, it provides stability to the wheel. So if either end of that control arm has a blown out bushing, you'll want to replace it. The good thing is that it doesn't take that much time to replace, but with the X-Drive cars, we have a couple more steps and we need a little bit more strength.
First, we have to remove the center cap in order to get to the axle bolt. Pre-LCI models might be able to get away with using some double-sided tape to remove the cap, but LCI models have an inner cap in between the wheel and bolt. With the wheels off and the axle bolt still in, this is the best time to clean the inner knuckle of any grease. We don't want anything to get in between the axle and hub during reassembly and potentially cause a slip. Try your best to remove whatever you can with a rag before using a diluted degreaser. Just make sure to have a catch ready. Due to all the rubber components in this area, we don't want to use brake cleaner here, as it will degrade the rubber. Also, this is quite tacky, so it would require lots of brake clean, while not even a bottle of degreaser took care of both sides easily with a citrus scent. I would also shy away from using a brush, as the grease tends to stick to the bristles. Just using the shop rags and a pick for the tighter areas worked best. Once this area is clean, we can place back on our wheels hand tight and lower the car. This will hold the wheel in place as we loosen the axle bolt. Conversely, you could ask a helper to hold down the brakes for you as you loosen the axle bolt while the car is up. Using a 17mm hex and a breaker bar will make short work of the bolt. But don't completely remove it. Just repeat on the opposite side for now, and we can lift up the car and support it on jack stands with wheel chocks. For now, let's focus on the driver's side. Completely remove the axle bolt, and if you can, impact off the 21mm nut. Otherwise, you'll need a T40 counterhold with a pass-through socket or wrench. Although removing the fender liner and splash shield with the ambient temp sensor is not required, it will give you more working room for the 18mm bolt. Alternatively, you could just remove the 8mm surrounding the end of the thrust arm and work around the liner. You just have to work around this weird piece to get to the bolt. With the bolt removed, turn the wheel to the right and slightly push down that end of the thrust arm. While the ball joint side needs the axle to be slightly pushed in and up to give the necessary clearance for the ball joint to come out, and we might as well clean this area too. Comparing the old and new parts, we can see that although the ball joint was in place, it's completely loose. On the other side, we opted for a solid spherical bushing from SPL parts that will provide increased stability to the car without the worry of rubber breakdown or grease leaking out. However, these do not come pre-pressed in from SPL parts. The stock bushing needs to be pressed out and replaced with the ones from SPL. You could even reuse your current arms if the ball joint is intact. The bushing will be pressed in from the chassis side without the lettering, with the C-clip on the lettering side, or pressed in from the opposite direction in which the bolt will run. For those of you located in the Bay Area and need this portion of the job done at a shop, feel free to head over to SV Bimmer and tell them Fritz sent you. If you prefer to not do this, you could opt for the fully adjustable arms. Just know that you'll probably need an alignment afterwards. In either case, I would remove the two ends, then bring in the arm over the tie rod and start at the ball joint side first. Tilt it forward toward the tie rod end to help it fall into place as you maneuver the axle out of the way. Loosely place on the included 21mm nut and now bring in the two ends for the opposite side from earlier. Both ends are equal in size and shape, so it doesn't matter which side of the bearing they go on. Once they're in, press the entire part in and it should fit snugly. Now we can place in our bolt with that weird kind of washer, aligning it by its pin when we tighten it down. Just be mindful of the wiring for the ambient temp sensor and torque to 81 foot-pounds. If you decided to replace this bolt, add an additional 90 degrees of rotation. While the ball joint side needs 175 Newton meters, but we need to run it in with a 21mm pass-through socket and T40 counterhold first, while holding the assembly in place by the rotor. Let's straighten out the wheel, and this next part requires your utmost attention. When reattaching the axle, you have to use a new bolt, and as you thread it in, you should feel the splines of the axle and hub engage one another. As you thread in the bolt, periodically check that the hub and axle are moving as one. If not, back it out and try again. Once it's all in alignment, hold the rotor in place and snug down the bolt. Don't torque it down, but ensure one last time that the hub and axle are properly joined before reinstalling any sensors, panels, or screws in this area. Now I wish I could say that the other side is the exact same thing, but on the N20 and N26 engines, we have much less working space than on the driver's side. And here I would recommend that you do remove the fender liner and corner splash shield to reveal the reason for our tight working space, the auxiliary radiator. I use a universal joint to loosen up the bolt so the pointed washer could be rotated downward, allowing room for a standard ratchet. Just be careful of using power tools, as you could very quickly back into the radiator, because that bolt runs right up against it, so go very slow here. And N55 owners, you're not off the hook, because you have an oil cooler here instead, while the auxiliary radiator is on the driver's side, so both sides have limited space. But once it's out, undo the 21mm nut at the ball joint side, and remove the arm from the knuckle as we did before by lifting up and pressing in on the axle. If you need to, go ahead and clean this area. And as expected, there's no resistance in the ball joint side. On the opposite end, confirm that the bushing is pressed in for the correct arm, because these are side specific. Now let's bring it in. The good thing about going to a spherical bushing is not only in its performance, but in its installation as well. Earlier we didn't need to bring the car to ride height before we tightened down the chassis side, and that's because this bushing moves freely, unlike a rubber bushing. So an easier and shorter install with better performing parts, to me, is worth the extra money. Otherwise, you'll need to torque the bushing at 100 Newton meters at ride height. And regardless of the bushing you choose, the ball joint side does not need to be torqued at ride height. You could also use a 21mm wrench in place of the pass-through socket. And from here, you can really see how fine those teeth of the hub and axle are. This works as a double-edged sword, as this provides tons of surface area for the two parts to engage each other. But we must ensure that they are indeed fully and properly engaged before tightening it down, because if this slips while driving, those teeth are gone for. So really take your time here. Once you've done that, you can reinstall your panels and put back on your wheels without the center cap, then lower the car. Even if you have someone to hold the brakes, you'll want the additional holding force of the tires and weight of the car. As a warm-up, we'll tighten the lugs to 140 Newton meters, then the axle bolt to 210 Newton meters. Now to bring back in our breaker bar, as we need an additional 90-degree turn indicated with a paint pen. Unfortunately, it seems like I need a new prescription. This is closer to 95 degrees, and expect the initial part to go well, with the back half requiring you to channel your inner Hulk. But if you need to, feel free to take breaks and change positions. This does not need to be done in one go, just as long as the two markings line up in the end. To tell you the truth, I was scared that the breaker bar was going to break or the bit would slip and strip the bolt. But both held up well, and thanks to the center cap, I won't be constantly reminded about how messed up my eyes are. After reviewing the footage, turning the 90 degrees doesn't take that long. It just requires a tremendous amount of energy. Although I was a little closer on the other side at 88 degrees, I clocked in at 3 minutes and 47 seconds, which is not what I would recommend. This was only for testing purposes. If you need to, take breaks, alternate between pushing and pulling positions, reposition the bar, and eventually you'll get it. However, don't use quick jerking motions to build the initial momentum. That could cause the bit to slip. Now, if you are curious as to why I recommend upgrading to SPL from genuine BMW parts or even the M Performance parts, check out this video, and I'll see you in that one.